Make your next move with American Express Business Platinum. You'll get 5 times membership rewards points on flights and prepaid hotels booked on AmexTravel.com. Plus, enjoy access to the American Express Global Lounge Collection. And with the welcome offer of 150,000 points, your business can soar to all new heights. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-platinum. Amex Business Platinum. Built for business by American Express.
Auto insurance can all seem the same until it comes time to use it. So don't get stuck paying more for less coverage. Switch to USAA Auto Insurance and you could start saving money in no time. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply. USAA.
It was an unfiltered look at genius at work, but also it shows these flawed people can be kind of dicks sometimes, and you kind of have this parasocial relationship with these people, and you kind of think, oh, they're amazing, you hold them up to such high standards, and then when you have this kind of footage that's released years later and you're just like, they were human, they were kind of nasty. It's very bizarre. I just don't think documentaries like that come around all too often.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Flixwatcher podcast. Today I'm joined by Tommy.
Hello.
Helen.
Hi.
And Liam.
Hello.
And we're going to be talking about They'll Love Me When I Am Dead. Thank you as always to the mighty people for their mighty, mighty tunes, and thanks to Ben from Rockwood Audio for editing this podcast and all the other podcasts he's done for us for a long, long time. Please do remember to head over to Spotify and Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star rating and a massively glowing review. And also join in the conversation with us on Twitter at FlixWatcherPod, or if you prefer Instagram, at Flixwatcher, or both. Why not?
Hello, film fans. Welcome to this episode of Flixwatcher Podcast. Our guests today are Tommy and Liam. Over to you, please, Liam, to say hello to our listeners and tell them a little bit more about who you are and what you do, please.
Hello. Yeah, you may have heard me on here before, but my name's Liam and I am one of the co-hosts of Spocklight, the Star Trek podcast from a non-Trekkie perspective. I've been on this voyage since 2016 now, and we cover all aspects of the Star Trek universe and far beyond. Our latest episode, in fact, is an episode of our Spotlight of the Movies thread, where we look at a film featuring a member of Star Trek alumni, either in front of or behind the camera, featuring guest appearance from you, Helen.
Whee!
To talk about Cube, which was a really, really fun chat, that was. And we've got some episodes coming up. We're going to do a special 40th anniversary episode for Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, which is back in cinemas in mid-June. So we are going to go to a very special screening of that at the BFI IMAX. Talk about that. That'll be a lot of fun. And we will also be covering the last season of Star Trek Discovery when that drops, which I am very excited about, as I was lucky enough to interview the star of Star Trek Discovery, Sonequa Martin Green, for the Pilot TV podcast recently, which was really, really fun. You can still hunt that interview down if you're interested. And you can find us, all our stuff, at Spotlight Pod, wherever you find podcasts.
And who are you, Tommy?
I'm Tommy. I am a freelance film and culture writer. I've had reviews and features published across various publications like Zavvi, Beneficial Shock magazine, and I also did a few video essays for Little White Lies. This is my first ever podcast appearance, ever, full stop. Yeah, so I'm very, very excited.
How can you do video essays but no podcasts? That's surely the ones.
I've never been invited, so I'm
about face. Okay, well, welcome.
Over the moon to be here. Thank you.
Hopefully it doesn't sour the experience.
Yeah, don't put you off.
You've chosen the film for today, They'll Love Me When I'm Dead. Can you tell us, first of all, why you chose it? And then we'll go to the synopsis, in which you have 60 seconds or less, or fewer, if you're that grammatically inclined, to tell us what happens in this film.
Awesome. Yes, so I am a big Orson Welles fan. Basically just kind of found my love of Orson Welles when I was at university, and then that kind of developed across the pandemic when I just really delved into his films. So this was kind of a companion piece to the Netflix film The Other Side of the Wind, and they're hand in hand, they kind of dovetail quite nicely into each other. And yeah, this is just a really fascinating movie about the creation of that film, why it failed, why it took so long to create it, and just all of the kind of trials and prevention for the completion across the years.
Okay. And your synopsis timer starts now.
Okay, so in the last, let's say 15 to 20 years of Orson Welles' life, the legendary director puts all of his hopes and dreams into making his film The Other Side of the Wind. And while he's trying to create that film, there are issues regarding financing the film, getting actors into it, producing everything and anything. And
that's it. You can cut it short if you want.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I'll cut it short there. Yeah.
Don't feel the need to fill it the full 60 seconds. You can be 5 seconds. You can be 59 seconds. It's all good. So we've actually had The Other Side of the Wind on here, haven't we, Helen?
We did.
And that was chosen by, I can't remember, it was 2 directors came on that day. It was Matt Whitecross, who directed Supersonic, amongst others, and Aaron Creevy, who directed Shifty and a fair few other things.
It was Matt's.
It was Matt's choice, was it? And we talked about it then. I didn't know about the film before it started. And one thing I remember was that I got to the end of that film and then this film started and I was like, no, that's enough now. So you chose it. So it's good to watch it after all these years of not watching it. What are your thoughts, Helen? I think you had a similar experience to me. This one started after...
Yeah, and then I was like, oh, should I have watched this one instead of that one? I mean, in retrospect, having watched the film and then watched this, if you have a choice of which to watch first, I think watching this first will inform your viewing of the film, and I think you'll probably have a better experience. But absolutely, yeah, I mean, I'm really glad I watched it, and I'm going to hold my hands up and say I've seen 2 Orson Welles films.
Which 2 of those?
Very much, well, The Other Side of the Wind, and I saw Citizen Kane like a few years ago. So I'm very much like, he was a great dude. Like, he paved the way for all of the filmmakers that I really love, but I haven't really gone deep down into that. Sorry, I haven't. Maybe I will. Maybe this will be the gateway into it. But yeah, I mean, this is from having obviously watched the film, like hearing things that there was no script. That does not surprise me. And all of the problems that kind of came up from that were really interesting. And also, I got to learn about the world's first bisexual dinosaur movie, which is a moment in this documentary. So overall, it was really entertaining. And Orson, what a bitch! He was such a bitch. Him and Burt Reynolds, like being bitches to was it Bogdanovich?
Yeah. A bit shocking that.
What about yourself, Liam? Had you heard of either of these films beforehand?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I actually listened to your episode you did on The Other Side of the Wind.
Oh, that was you?
Way back in the day. Yeah.
We weren't that favourable towards it, were we? I can't remember.
No, you weren't. And I remember listening to it because I was actually excited for when The Other Side of the Wind dropped on Netflix. Because obviously, it's Orson, as we learn in this documentary, had lots of kind of lost films. And this is one of them. It's probably the one that we're most likely to see. And yeah, I was intrigued, but I gotta say that your episode on it may have been one of the contributing factors to me not watching it until now.
Oh, so you actually listened to our episode without watching the film, or having seen it?
Yeah. I knew it wasn't going to be the kind of film that you could really kind of spoil, kind of thing, So yeah, I did watch The Other Side of the Wind alongside this. Finally took that opportunity, and I did watch They'll Love Me When I'm Dead first, which I do think is the better way round to do it.
Agreed.
Just gives you a lot of context for what you're going to see, such as that. And ultimately, I do think They'll Love Me When I'm Dead is the the more satisfying film experience than The Other Side of the Wind. So yeah, it's an interesting one to talk about. I'm also a big fan of Orson Welles. At the end of the day, I mean, you know, Citizen Kane has its reputation for a reason. I think there's lots of other films of his I like as well, but at the same time, I don't really think he ever bettered Kane. Not really through any fault of his own particularly, because the tragedy of Wells is that he was constantly hampered by the studios pretty much on every single film after Kane, really. You know, apart from stuff he independently financed, like F for Fake, it basically never got a chance to kind of, you know, get his own vision to the screen like every time. So it's really tragic, really.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I feel about this documentary still. And I think it does cast a wider net than just the making of his last film, because it does cover his interesting touch points. It wasn't like a hagiography about Orson Welles, but it does touch upon the films that he, like you said, that he doesn't finish, and also his state of mind like at that kind of time and throughout his filmmaking career. So it was, I think for me, it was more like an Orson Welles documentary, but kind of in and around The Other Side of the Wind. I think I need to watch The Other Side of the Wind again. I just don't know when I will do, because it's still like, I haven't revisited our episode talking about it. I remember just thinking, I don't understand what's going on here. Maybe I'm just too dumb for film people for this kind of film.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Like, I've seen it twice, and I really disliked it the first time. I was kind of in awe that it existed. Like, you know, when it opens up and it says, you know, and Netflix presents an Orson Welles film. That's a weird sentence anyway. But the second time I found it a lot more satisfying, but you're not really watching it as like a film. It's more of like a product, and you just kind of, I watch it and I'm kind of thinking all the ideas are really, really great, and everything that Welles does is fantastic and it's ahead of its time, but I'm only really thinking of the other films that came after it. So like, I watched it and I'm like, oh yeah, this reminds me of Irma Vep or The Souvenir or like Pain and Glory. And it's just like, it's great that Welles was able to do all this stuff 30 years before these films did, but they just did it infinitely better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ultimately, watching the documentary, my big takeaway from it, really, especially once I watched Other Side of the Wind alongside it, was I'm not really convinced this should have ever happened, in terms of like the documentary is really great. I really like the documentary is really quite fascinating at times, but it kind of made me think, I've seen other people commentate on this as well, that really maybe this film should have never come out of the fold. And in all honesty, watching They'll Love Me When I'm Dead, all it could make me think was that I felt Peter Bogdanovich was incredibly compromised, considering he was the person who ended up kind of putting this film together, essentially. Because if you look at his relationship with Welles, which The Other Side of the Wind is partially about, at the end, obviously John Huston essentially is Welles, Peter Bogdanovich is essentially himself, and the most interesting parts of that film are the parts that seem focused on their real relationship. And like you say, Helen, when you're watching this and there's that clip with the Burt Reynolds kind of interview of Welles, and they're both ripping it out of Bogdanovich, and it cuts to Bogdanovich watching that now, and he's obviously still in incredible pain over that kind of portrayal. It kind of made me think, I was like, are you way too emotionally close to be the person putting this together? And although obviously you're basing it on Welles' notes, there's hundreds of hours of footage, you can only do so much. You're making decisions as to how you edit this film that stars you, and where you're essentially playing yourself, and it's about your relationship with your friend who's now dead. I'm like, I was just like, I'm not quite convinced this is the best idea. And after seeing the film, I kind of think that even more.
For sure. Yeah, and that kind of makes the film, I think, more interesting, because while it's really biographical of Welles and it does show his kind of genius and his persona, it is also quite damning in the way that it shows a lot of his flaws as well. Like it does, like you said, it just show him bitching about Bogdanovich on stage, but it just highlights that he was quite petty and jealous. And then there was the sequence of the AFI awards where he's
that
like
was
groveling for money.
Sad, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was just a kind of, it was quite raw, and
yeah.
I thought that was really interesting about it, because it could just be heralded as like a, look what an amazing guy he was, but it was just like, no, it's quite sad in a way. And that was definitely, I think a lot of it is a lot more personal than he let out to be, and definitely more emotionally attached, which again just makes for a more interesting documentary, I feel.
When you talk about, obviously, him as a character, a lot of times we have these documentaries about people who got to the peak and just stayed there because they had all these different personalities. I'm thinking like the Michael Jordan documentary. Well, not Michael Jordan, the Chicago Bulls one, which name escapes me right now. But you can see all the way through that, they're just talking about how Michael Jordan was fixated in so many different ways. He would beat, he'd gamble the people who had paid the least at Chicago Bulls. I'm not talking about the other basketball players. I'm talking about the caretakers, for example. He'd like gamble with them and be pissed off if they took like $1 off him. He'd be really like lean into it. But it kind of works out as okay because he did all these amazing things and he's arguably the most successful basketball player that has ever existed. But then you see these kind of traits in Orson Welles and you're like, okay, so you made Citizen Kane, great. And you made, the Magnificent Ambersons, which people love. And there's a whole host of films in this which I'd never heard of his, which I'm like, oh, maybe I should check them out. But ultimately, it seemed to end on such a bum note, his life and his career, that all his personality traits just seem like, oh mate, you're just a bit trying, a bit cloying, a bit sad, a bit. Whereas if he'd ended on a high, finished on 3 fantastic films, then all these kind of traits I think would have been seen as like, this is part of what it takes to make a genius. I don't know. I just had a monologue there. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting that I think his influence way kind of like outlives kind of what he actually did and how people have taken what he did and really like run with it, and like the amount of like Simpsons fodder that's come from from just Citizen Kane is amazing. So that kind of like cultural impact of Welles is what people are more familiar with than maybe his actual work and possibly the champagne.
Yes.
The French champagne.
So that's kind of what people tend to more maybe remember him for, and being a bit of an arse. As all the great directors are. Not all of them. Most of them, if they're men.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, it's like that's kind of what makes it even more of a unique perspective. Is a lot of it reminded me of Get Back in the way that it was an unfiltered look at just genius at work, but also it shows these flawed people can be kind of dicks sometimes. And you kind of have this parasocial relationship with these people and you kind of think, oh, they're amazing. You hold them up to such high standards. And then when you have this kind of footage that's released years later and you're just like, they were human. They were kind of nasty, especially Welles. He was smoking all the time and he was eating, was it like fudgesicles or something, like non-stop.
staying at Bogdanovich's house when it should have been like a week for like 3 years. You're like, mate, come on.
Yeah, exactly. It's literally squatting and you're just kind of thinking like, it's really sad, but that's kind of a hero to many and kind of like this magnate, like this huge kind of personality. And they're just like, they're just, setting fire to their dressing gown by forgetting to put a cigar out, and it's very bizarre. I just don't think documentaries like that come around all too often when you just breaks down these people into real raw kind of problems.
I think the thing again with the Get Back documentary is that you're still going back to the most successful pop rock band that's ever existed, and some of the scenes in that where you see him actually like Paul McCartney pulling out Get Back out of his arse just when it's just strumming away, and you're like, well, that's why this is amazing. But with this, you don't really see that. You see you see the arsey side of Paul and John particularly on that, but then you just see a lot of arsey side of Orson Welles in this, but not much kind of payback. You don't see the gold medal at the end going, yes, get in.
Yeah, I suppose that kind of, in a way, is the other side of the wind, but that wasn't really to his final standard. There's some moments of goodness in it, but obviously, it is watch the other film, hopefully you can see where the gold standard lies. But if anything, it's a very good advertisement to watch all of his other stuff, because the way that the documentary is edited is, I like the kind of asking a question and then answering it with a film clip. And I like just how that kind of relays back to his whole filmography. And there's just stuff in there that you're like, oh, you know what, that's a really interesting sequence. I'm going to check that out. I think it's a good entryway for people to watch more Orson Welles movies if they were more accessible.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the issue in terms of with Wells, the accessibility, I feel, in terms of, because all of his projects pretty much were hampered by the studio, then often they've had to be, saved in essentially reconstructions after he's passed away, and such like things like Touch of Evil and Magnificent Ambersons and such like that. There's multiple cuts out there. We're never going to see the intended ending of Magnificent Ambersons because the studio destroyed the footage. And like I said, this all adds up to the tragedy of Wells and the fact that he was so massively ahead of his time ultimately. But I do think that, if this can convince people to track some of his other stuff down to see his kind of earlier work, you can see the genius and magic in so much of his stuff, much more so than in The Other Side of the Wind at the end of the day. So track down the earlier stuff beyond Citizen Kane.
Let's head to the scores.
At LinkedIn, we know hiring is a big deal for your small business. Sometimes it can feel a little, overwhelming. LinkedIn uses data that you can't find anywhere else to give you the best candidates, all so you can feel confident you're hiring the best person for the job. And even a little, hiring bliss. See why 86% of small businesses who post a job on LinkedIn get a qualified candidate within a day. Post a job for free at linkedin.com/achieve. LinkedIn, your next great hire is here.
I'm Sam Clements, host of the 90 Minutes or Less Film Festival, another podcast in the Stripped Media family, a podcast that celebrates movies under 90 minutes long. Each episode, I'm joined by a special guest who selects a movie to join our prestigious lineup. Past guests have included fellow Stripped Media family members Martin and Sam from Song by Song, and Kobe from Flixwatcher, and Dave from The Wire Stripped. Search for us now on the app you're currently listening to this podcast, or join us at 90minfilmfest.com.
Welcome to our Flixwatcher scores. They're always out of 5, and you can have decimal places. And we'll start with you, please, Tommy, with your recommendability.
4 for recommendability. Basically, I just thought it's quick. It's, an hour and a half, very fast-paced editing. It basically is like watching a video essay, really, and it's very, very easy and accessible. And I think if you weren't familiar with Orson Welles as well, it's a good entryway just to kind of understand the man he is and to watch his films later on.
Liam?
Yeah, for recommendability, I'd give this a 3.4. I think it's a good documentary and I really enjoyed it. And, I think there's parts of it that are very fascinating. I don't particularly think, in all honesty, it's made for the uninitiated when it comes to kind of Wells, because it is so focused in on the tail end of his career, The Other Side of the Wind. And like you say, Kobe, it's like, I think for people who don't know a huge amount of his work, I think it could be just quite a sad watch at the end of the day, because I don't think you're getting to see the best of Wells. There are a couple of clips from throughout his career and stuff like where you go, oh, wow, okay, I can see the genius in that, and you might want to explore further. But I think there was, considering Wells is like such a towering cinematic landmark director, I think there's a more kind of rounded documentary to be made kind of over his entire career, which could go on longer. I think this was very specifically made, obviously, to be a companion piece to the release The Other Side of the Wind. In that respect, I do think it's very interesting, but I'm not sure if it's going to get kind of new Wells devotees as a result.
Helen?
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 4. I think it works at its best as a companion piece to the film. Watch this first and then the film after. Very clear on that. And I think it is niche, but I think if you're interested in kind of cinema and filmmaking and have a vague interest in Welles. I mean, I don't really know that much about his films, and I still really enjoyed it and found it interesting, and have kind of, added a few of his films onto my watch list to try and seek out. So I think even with my fleeting interest, it was still interesting enough. And it just kind of isn't that period of Hollywood, if you're kind of into films, it was just so fascinating because of all of the change that was happening, the influence on Europe and the way that the studios were over, and there was very much a different style of filmmaking. So I think if you're interested in film history, then you'd definitely be interested in this.
I'm going to go for 3. I think, just following on from what Helen said, and it's part of the discussion now, what I would really love to see, so hey, if you're a filmmaker, you want to make a film documentary series just for me, I'd like to see Orson Welles in context with Hitchcock, in context with the Dennis Hopper and that ilk, and because a lot of that era is super interesting, but I can't pin it, I can't get it in my head because it's so far removed from what we have. The studio system and how that would locked out people that they didn't like, how different creators and directors operated in Europe, in Hollywood, and other places in the US. I'd really love to see that, and then put it all into one kind of context, like a Get Back type documentary, which lays it all out. I think that'd be really, really cool. This, I think I still think you'd recommend it to cinephiles, really. I don't think the average person on the street would be that interested in this or the subsequent films, so I think it's a hard watch. Yeah, 3. Repeat viewing. Tommy?
So I've seen this twice. I would give it a 3, I think, purely because it's so short and it's so snappy. I don't think it allows for too much nuance to kind of get you to go in wanting more. I think it would just be easier just to find the clips you want online and watch them, like behind the scenes stuff. But yeah, I still think it's a fun time.
Liam?
Repeat viewing, I'd give this a 2. Literally, I think it was a really great watch. I was really fascinated by it, watching it, but I've got no reason really to ever watch it again. I'm certainly not going to watch The Other Side of the Wind again. So I'm just it's one of those things. I perfectly enjoyed it, but I got what I needed out of it, and that's probably it now. I'll more likely rewatch some other Welles films rather than this,
Or 2 sounds quite generous based on your deliberation there. Helen?
I was just going to say, have you seen Easy Riders, Raging Bulls? Because that does kind of, that documentary is that period.
I know about
the book as well.
Realize,
yeah. There's a film as well.
Version.
Okay.
Which doesn't quite dig into this, but it's a good intro. I mean, the book is amazing. I love the book loads, but that does exist. So yeah, repeat viewing. I mean, if you've listened to any documentaries we've covered before, they're not high repeat viewing because you tend to get what you get from it. And I was going to say, we haven't really mentioned it's narrated by Alan Cumming, and he does quite a good job of it, and he's quite entertaining and bring it along. Give it a 1.5 repeats. Probably unlikely I'm going to watch it, but it has made me think I should watch more Orson Welles films. I'd do that ahead of watching this again.
I'm going in for 1. Can't think of why I'd watch it again. If for some reason someone said you need to watch The Other Side of the Wind again, I'd probably watch this again and then watch The Other Side of the Wind. That's my kind of caveat. I'm way into it.
Is someone forcing you at gunpoint in this situation?
Small screen score, Tommy?
A small screen score, I'd probably give it a 3. I watched this on TV, and I feel like it's probably the only way you'd be able to watch it these days, unless you had a skin on screen of your own. But yeah, I think it was serviceable. And there's definitely the interesting bits with Alan Cummings, I think, are relatively cinematic, I suppose, but a lot of them are just riffing off Orson Welles stuff like F for Fake and Lady from Shanghai. So it's not original, but that is the stuff that makes this documentary a little bit more interesting than most.
Liam?
A small screen score, I'd give this a 4.9. I think this is perfectly made for Netflix, really, as a documentary. The only reason I don't give it the full 5 is because there are a few tantalizing clips in here of other Lost Welles projects, like The Deep, his adaptation of Dead Calm, which has obviously been made as a movie later with Sam Neill and Nicole Kidman, which is also very good. And it's one of those ones where it's like you see these little clips, you're like, oh my God, yeah, that would have been amazing, but you're never going to get to see it. And it would be kind of amazing to see just those little clips on a cinema screen where you just be like, oh, if only we can have that, and we can't. So yeah, I'll give it a 4.9 for that reason.
Helen?
I'm going to give it the full 5. I think it's great for home viewing, and yeah, you can watch this on the other side of the wind, have yourself a little Orson afternoon.
I didn't know where you're going with that. I'm going to go for 5 as well. I could not imagine wanting to see this at the cinema. Tommy, engagement score.
I would give this one a 4. I just think the way that it was kind of edited together, assembled, I just think was really engaging, really fast, and just speaking to the audience directly as well kind of really helps the immersion. So yeah.
And Liam?
I give this a 3.8 in terms of engagement. I think it's perfectly engaging. There are parts of it that I think are really interesting. I always find with kind of documentaries of this nature, where you kind of know kind of like a bit about the background of the kind of stuff they talk about, you can kind of do other things while watching it quite easily. But, you know, I did enjoy it. Orson Welles, always an engaging presence, but I was going to say, just literally as a quick recommendation, because the Fat Kobe, you said that it was so kind of sad to see Wells in his kind of later years in a kind of sad state in this film. If you want to be engaged by Orson Welles the man, then I recommend hunting down Orson Welles' sketchbook on YouTube, which is 7-part series from the BBC 1955, where he essentially just monologues to camera about a random range of subjects, including the police, bullfighting, critics, and literally just talks straight to camera for 15 minutes per episode. And his voice is just so commanding, incredible. Hunt it down. You won't regret it.
Well, I mean, that's why it's a sad kind of character later on, isn't it? Because we know of the heights that he can achieve and has achieved in the past, and that's the challenge. To see him like scrabbling around at the AFI thing saying, hey, I've got a film, guys. If you want to give us some money, I'm sure. Or, yeah, we'll take it. So, yeah, I may or may not look out for that. Maybe watch one of them. 15 minutes sounds doable. Helen, engagement score.
Orson Welles, you would have loved crowdfunder. I thought for a second there, Liam, you were going to go Kickstarter, yeah, crowdfunder, whatever. I thought you'd go fund me. I thought you were going to say, if you want to watch something, then it's the Muppet film that he's in.
Oh, iconic.
Which one was that?
Oh, no, I thought you were going to say the thing I would recommend is the original teaser trailer to Star Trek The Motion Picture, which Orson Welles provided the voiceover for.
There you go.
Leonard Nimoy as Mr. Spock. Check it out.
Based on that, does that mean that any Orson Welles film is available for Spocklight at the movies?
No, we're not going that tangential, Kobe.
Oh,
So it's the Muppet movie from 1979. He's in that one.
Is the Muppet movie the first one? Or was that one earlier than that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
Engagement score, Helen.
Yeah, so I'm going to give it a 4. I think it's really interesting. There's lots of interesting bits, like a little bit of an intro of his early life. Like he was reading at 2. He was a clever little baby. And yeah, I just can't get over the bisexual dinosaur movie. It was just wild. And yeah, it's just over an hour and a half. It's pretty entertaining. So yeah, I had a great time. 4.
I'm going to give it 3.1. I must admit I wasn't perhaps giving it the most due care and attention. And I kind of find that documentaries, you don't often have to. You can just kind of let them wash over you a bit. But this one, because it's Wells and because it's a cineastic piece, then it does really, to get the most out of it, you do want to pay attention. Especially because they didn't often make it clear who was speaking. There would always be by inference in the interview where it say, my dad, Peter, Mr. Daddy Bogdanovich, blah, 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 blah. So it wouldn't have those lower thirds often to tell you who was in it. So that kind of disengaged me, but also made me think who is this a bit more? So that gives my score of 3. Gives us an overall score of 3.41250. Documentary-wise, I think that's fairly good. To be honest with you.
Very good news.
Repeat viewing score 1.875 is the killer there.
Yeah.
Tommy and Liam, can you tell us where we can find you guys online? And we'll say goodbye to the listeners.
Yes, you can follow me on Twitter at TommyJames__ or on Letterboxd at Tommy_James.
You like an underscore, Liam?
I do like an underscore.
Yeah, you can find me at Spocklight Pod on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook for all the latest news about Spocklight. And you can find Spocklight on any good podcast provider as well. And I am also on Letterboxd as The Demps.
Why not LH Dempsey like you are, Liam H Dempsey like you are everywhere else?
Because it's The Demps on Letterboxd. I don't know what to tell you.
Because it isn't.
If you look up Liam Dempsey on Letterboxd, you will find me. But I'm just saying, it's The Demps.
The Demps, fine, sure. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much to you, Tommy, for bringing in They'll Love Me When I'm Dead. And see you later, listeners.
Thanks for coming on.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Enjoyed this episode of Flixwatcher podcast? Why not leave us a 5-star review on iTunes? You can also follow us at FlixWatcherPod on Twitter, and we're at FlixWatcher on Instagram. Thanks as always to the mighty people for their mighty tunes and Rockwood Audio's editing skills. If you're looking to get your podcast edited as sweet as this, get in touch with Rockwood, ROKK Wood Audio. Tell them Flixwatcher sent you.
You just heard a Stripped Media production.